good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. I'm Brian Sanders. I am the president of HSE UAV, and here with me today, I have Simon Azalin, who's coming on live. There we go. And then also Kelly Newbecker, who's still connecting with us. You'll see her in a moment. And then let me just look at a couple things. We've got participants joining us from all different countries right now. And thanks again. I've got some folks calling in on the phone as well. Give me a second here. And yeah, it looks like we've got folks representing from a lot of different places. So just thanks for joining us. And you know, today's webinar is a focus group specifically about the regulatory environment and regulations and how that impacts spraying drones specifically. And you know, we're hosting these webinars on an ongoing basis here, especially because most of us are at home and what I call on lockdown or house arrest. But you know, it's a great time for all of us to get together and be able to answer a lot of these questions and, you know, really just provide whatever you were looking for. So that's our intention with the webinar today. If you have questions that are not related to the regulatory compliance aspects of spraying drones, no problem. We have other focused webinars for that. We just did one yesterday about drone technology in general. That's on our YouTube page. You can check that out after this. And then this recording will also be hosted on YouTube. We'll go through your questions live. Some of the ones you submitted ahead of time by email we'll address. Let's see. Oh, I should tell you how to do this. So on Zoom, right now we can't see you and we can't hear you. Okay, so you're just silent. But the way to get your questions to us is at the bottom of your screen, whether you're on a laptop or a smartphone, look for the thing that says Q&A. And if you see on that Q&A, it gives you the ability to actually submit and ask questions. What happens is your question comes over to us. We'll either type it back and respond to you that way, or we'll answer it live. And then once your question's answered, either live or written, then it will be visible to everyone else that's on the webinar with us today. So that's how all that works. If you have any questions, you can also type it in the Q&A, okay? And we'll address that to you as well. Awesome. All right, so without further ado, I want to introduce the rest of my team to you here. One of the things that I just want to make sure is clear is HSE is not an attorney, right? So we can't give or offer any kind of legal advice. We don't have any attorney-client privileges or any of that stuff. And that's also apparent in our pricing. So you can see that we are not charging attorney rates here, okay? Yeah, without further ado, Simon is on with us. Simon, you want to say hi real quick?
Hi guys, how you guys doing?
Awesome. And Simon heads up and provides training services for our clients. He's our chief flight instructor. And Simon also heads up all of our technical kind of divisions of the company. So, you know, you'll see Simon on a lot of our webinars. Glad to have you here, Simon. Thank you. And then Joy, I want to introduce Joy as well. So this is Joy. You want to say hi, Joy?
Hi.
All right, perfect.
How are you?
So Joy manages the services that HSE offers. So that includes like scheduling of our events, training events, demonstrations, webinars such as this one. And Joy also is accountable for our FAA services division, which is really hosting this webinar. And then last but not least, our special guest today is Kelly Newbecker. Kelly, will you say hi real quick?
Hey, how y'all doing?
Awesome. All right, cool. Coming through loud and clear, Kelly. Great. So I want to give you some background on Kelly. And Kelly, if there's anything I miss or anything you want to add in, just, you know, take the chance to do that. So Kelly is our consultant, and Kelly's job is she really helps our customers submit all of their FAA paperwork and processing. She and Joy work in tandem to do that. And the goal of this service is to make it easy on customers so that you guys don't have to figure out like, what's a 137, what's a 107, you know, all of these CFRs and components. The goal is to just take all that stress off your shoulders, and Kelly and Joy take care of it on our side. They're experts. They know what all this stuff means. They live it and breathe it day in and day out. Kelly's been in the aerospace industry for more than 34 years. In fact, she's worked as an FAA airspace specialist with the headquarters of the FAA. She's also a veteran. So Kelly, thanks again for your service to our country. So appreciate that.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, you're welcome. And then also, Kelly's written proposals, and I'm sorry, I'm looking at it over here so I don't miss anything. Kelly's written proposals for UAS test sites around the country and developed standard operating procedures and training documents all over the country, but also in the state of Florida. And she also participated in co-authored studies with the Federal Railway Administration. You know, she's let's see, Kelly, I don't want to, you're a Virginia barred attorney, but no longer officially practices law, and you're not practicing law in this capacity. Is that correct?
Correct. This is in my consultant capacity. I'm still within good standing with the Virginia Bar, but I do not practice law anymore officially.
Cool. Bet you're like, shh. All right. This drone stuff's got to be way more fun anyway, right?
Yeah, it is.
I thought so. All right, cool. So I'm going to turn it over to Joy and Kelly, and I know that you guys, we've got some questions that were submitted ahead of time, and then we've got a couple folks that have submitted questions here as well on our Q&A. So I'm just going to turn it over to y'all and have at it. And we'll be on this webinar today for another 25 minutes, and we'll give you attendees kind of a reminder a couple minutes beforehand that we're wrapping up, so to submit your questions if we haven't answered them. All right, cool. I'll turn it over to you, Joy.
All right, thank you. So we're going to go over some of the questions that were submitted with y'all's RSVPs, and we're not sure if these folks are actually on live with us or not, but we'll answer the questions as best we can without further clarification from them. And Brian, actually, we did have a couple kind of more technical questions about the drones and technology. We actually hosted a webinar yesterday that covered these questions in depth. So if you guys didn't get the link to that, you could email back to the confirmation or the reminder, and I can send you guys the link to the webinar to answer that more in depth. But Brian, it was about chemical labeling, you know, spraying for noxious weeds in extensive terrain, slopes, how to avoid trees, like collision avoidance. If you just kind of want to do a brief kind of answer, just in case that client's on the call with us, and then I'll go back to the compliance.
Yeah, sure. Simon, do you want to take that question real quick?
Yes. Hang on, let me make sure I wasn't muted here. Okay. Okay, so the question is regarding the labeling for. Sorry about that. Mute. Okay. Getting an echo here. So the question is regarding the labeling for drones, and we did discuss this a little bit yesterday. We know that the chemical manufacturers out there are creating labeling specific for drones. That's not available quite yet. We still have to work under the aerial applicators labeling. And what was the other part of that question there? I missed the first half because I was muted, actually.
That's okay, I can ask you again. Yeah. So it was about basically labels that aren't, you know, it's not labeled for drone use yet. And then spraying for noxious weeds on terrain, like steep terrain, and then how to avoid trees or slope spraying. Just a really brief answer because they'll get the link to the webinar.
Got it. So spraying around trees is fairly straightforward with our systems. We now have obstacle avoidance available in our aircraft, but you can also mark any trees or obstacles in your flight plan, so the drone will automatically fly around. As far as spraying on slopes, our terrain sensors typically won't have any issues with most slopes, but you are also able to manually adjust the altitude as the aircraft is flying. So there's ways around both of those issues. And again, we covered this a lot more in depth in our other videos, so we'll post the YouTube link to that recording, and there's a little bit more in depth. And if you guys have any other questions that we're not answering here, you can always contact us on our website at hsc-uav.com.
Cool, thanks, Simon. Okay, so then we'll get right into, let me go back over here really quick. So we have a couple questions from Elon. Thanks for coming back again, Elon. We're actually gonna get to a little bit on the beyond visual line of sight too, so just hang tight. Okay, so the first question we had was regarding cost of licensing, permits, etc., time required for licensing, training, etc., and then max takeoff weights allowed. So I'm kind of going to answer this in a couple different parts. So in the United States, there's not any flight training required for your licensing as far as your drone pilot license. There is your chemical applicating license that you'll get, you know, at your state level. But for the FAA, there's not an actual flight training. It's your knowledge test for your drone pilot license. Now, if you're getting and operating under exemptions, the FAA will require you to have a training program and manual for your business and how you train your pilot flight crew and any ongoing or recurring training and initial training. So they'll want to see that you have a training program and what that manual is. And then as far as maximum takeoff weights. So under Part 107 operations, you must maintain under 55 pounds. If you want to operate over 55 pounds, then it will require an exemption. And then the heaviest exemption that we've seen approved so far is about 250 plus. But at this time, there does not appear to be a set maximum takeoff weight for drones yet. It will, of course, you know, for the exemption, you'd get a safety case, just like operating over 55 pounds, you know, the heavier, you know, you'll justify with the safety case. But that answers that first part. And then we did have a question that came up, and this, we've talked a lot about this. The question's, how are agriculture drones going to be avoided by crop dusters and ag pilots? So first of all, any manned or unmanned, these agricultural operations are happening in controlled environments that are scheduled with the clients that they have the contract with. And again, NOTAMs by manned and unmanned pilots are filed 24 hours in advance, and all pilots, you know, the FAA requires you to adhere to NOTAMs. And then, of course, spraying drones are generally operated between 15 to 50 feet altitude. They're also required by regulations to give right-of-way to manned aircraft. So that's how sprayer drones and manned pilots are avoiding each other. Let's see. Another one, and we weren't sure exactly which part the customer was talking about on this, but he's asking, how can I arrange a group of drones to do a surveillance of an extensive amount of territory? So if you're asking about software, hardware, the drone capabilities, you know, tethered or long-range drones, setting up perimeter boundaries, anything like that, again, that's more of a technical, and you can refer back to the webinar or, you know, reply to the email, contact us, and we can kind of go more in depth in that. Or join us for next Thursday's webinar. It's going to be everything drones. So we can talk about whatever y'all want. But if you're referring to the compliance options of covering a lot of territory in a group of drones, right now you could do that with multiple aircraft and multiple pilots. But if you wanted to do multiple aircraft on a single pilot, that would require an exemption. Or if you want to operate beyond visual line of sight, that is also an exemption. Again, with safety case, you would need FAA approvals to do anything with more than one aircraft. So going back to the Q&A we had from Ilon on the beyond visual line of sight, he's asking, he'd be interesting to hear your view regarding beyond visual line of sight regulations if we spray above trees, high canopy, etc. And is it really beyond visual line of sight? I asked, since it can be very close to a tree, but we really don't see the drone. So beyond visual line of sight, that's when you can't see the drone and your drone's actually operating out of your line of sight at all. If you lose sight for a second, like an intermittent kind of time period because of a tree or just kind of behind the canopy for a second, that's okay and expected as it's coming, you know, back around barriers or obstacles. If you're really far out, can't see the drone, staying out of your line of sight, that's when it would fall under beyond visual line of sight. So hopefully that answered your questions there.
And also, can I add something to that?
Oh yeah, of course.
Okay, so it depends on what you mean by canopy. If you're under an actual structure that you consider a canopy, and say you're under a tent or some type of structure that you're underneath, it's not going to apply. But if you're flying over the top of that canopy and you've lost visual line of sight over the top of that canopy. If you don't have a visual observer assisting you, then that would technically kind of be beyond visual line of sight, depending on how long it's going to be operating over that canopy. The tree line that you're referring to, sporadically through the trees, if you lose sight, technically you're not supposed to ever lose sight of the aircraft in visual line of sight. But if you use visual observers, that's what they aid in to help you. Technically, the pilot and the visual line, or the visual observer, are supposed to maintain visual line of sight of the aircraft at all times. So that's, I hope that helps clarify. If you're a little confused about that, let us know. But as Joy was saying, beyond visual line of sight is basically when the aircraft is operating way outside of your line of sight, like a lot of some of the railroads are doing right now, where they're like miles down the track that you can't keep visual line of sight. There's also extended line of sight. But I believe in this case, if it was just sporadic and it was just for a couple seconds at a time, I think you could still get by with visual line of sight using a visual observer.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. Okay, let's see. We also had Tim ask, why would I need an FAA 137 license? So we are actually, I'm going to share screen here. And, oh, or Brian, actually, you might share screen.
Sure thing. Hang tight for a sec. You can go ahead and start that question, Joy, and I'll get it ready on my side.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Okay.
Awesome.
So Tim's asking, why would I need an FAA 137 license? So 137 is what the aerial spraying is. So if you're going to be spraying from drones, you need some relief from 137, and depending on whether you're operating under 55 or over 55, that exemption or Part 107 operations, the 137 certificate is the agricultural operator certificate. So there's 4 different parts to this, and we'll bring up the slide in just a moment. And let me, yep, okay. So we'll bring up the slide in just a moment. The first part, of course, is your pilot license, whether that's your Part 107 remote pilot license or if you're already a manned pilot with the UAS rating. The second part is your state chemical licensing. And the third is your 137 operator certificate. And then your fourth is your exemption. So you can start the 137 certificate process once your exemption's been submitted and go through, you know, get both approvals basically at the same time. So on, nope, it won't bring it up there. You've got that right, Brian? So
I do, and I am just about ready here.
okay, cool.
Sure.
So, and part of HSE's goal is to help our clients be able to get everything you need to be able to fly. The aircraft, the training, the FAA approvals, everything to help support you. So we offer our spraying packages, and that's where Kelly will get all the paperwork and the exemptions for the approvals you need. And we also help support you through the 137 certificate process. So that way you guys aren't on your own with this. It is something you can definitely do on your own. We just kind of have the experts and the experience, and we have a lot of clients that have their exemption and approvals to be able to operate out there. Some of our clients are the very first ones in the state that are spraying from drones, so that's pretty cool.
Great.
Definitely cool to be pioneers here.
Joy, I believe that everyone on the call can now see the slide if they're on their computer.
Oh yeah, there you go. So we've kind of put, 4 pieces of the processing pie, and the best way to eat it is all at once. So again, we've got the remote pilot certificate or Part 61 or whatever manned pilot license you already have. You can add your UAS rating. And of course your state chemical licensing. Oh, I didn't touch on that part. So states have reciprocal states. So if you're operating outside of your state, you want to definitely check what your state regulations are, because you can also be licensed to, to operate in other states around you, or whatever they have reciprocal states in. And then of course your FAA exemptions. That is dependent on whether you're going to operate under 107 because you're under 55 pounds, but you're spraying from a drone. And Kelly, that it's 107.37, right? The waiver that we would get from that.
No, it's 107.36.
Okay, yeah, she's got them all memorized. So basically we get you a waiver to 107 to be able to spray from drones. And then of course, if you're operating over 55 pounds, you need another exemption. And then the relief from the Part 137 that doesn't apply to unmanned operations. And then there's your Part 137 agricultural aircraft operator certificate. So do we have, it looks like we might have another question here from Chuck. He says, are the rules for products applied different between chemical spraying and seed or fertilizer? What if the seed is treated with chemicals? So okay, go ahead, Kelly.
So to answer that, there is a section under 137 Part 3 or 137, yeah, is it 137.3? I believe that has a list of all the poisons and chemicals that are on their list that require Part 137. If your seed is treated with any type of chemical, yes, you need a Part 137. There are certain fogs, certain seeds, anything other than water, basically. If it's interpreted to be under any of the list of 137.3, then yes, you are going to need a Part 137 agricultural spraying license.
Thank you. And just to touch on that too, because our M8A Pro aircraft is actually a sprayer drone that has a payload swap option for a seeder so that you can dispense fertilizer. And when we get the exemption, that covers whether it's liquid or solid. And then on your aircraft operator certificate, it also shows whether you're going to be dispensing liquid or solid or both. So we would put that in there.
Great. Just to add to that,
yeah.
You know, customers are also using that aircraft while they're waiting for their actual 137 certificate. You can use that 20 liter. It's a granule spreader, so you can also use it to seed for cover crops, or, you know, use it in a variety of other ways. And then Kelly, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that any organics or nutrients are authorized to be dispensed from a drone without the 137. Is that correct?
If it doesn't fall on that list.
Yeah, it has to, if it does not fall under the list, and then we would still have to get clarification of it.
Great.
And then there's some EPA regulations that might come into play on that as well.
Okay, awesome, thank you.
Cool, thanks. We've got another one from Tim really quick, and then I'll get back to another question. So, will you need a waiver every time you spray with a 107 under 55 pounds? So, you get the exemption. Those are good at this time. Those are good for 2 years, and then you can renew your exemption. So basically, if you're operating under 107 and dispensing economic poisons, then yes, you're operating under your exemption the entire time. If you're not spraying, you know, you can kind of go in and out of your exemption or different operations. But yes, if you're under 55 pounds, under 107, and spraying, then yes, your exemption is required. And okay, then we have, oh, go ahead.
So, sorry, I just want to elaborate on that. So he's asking, each time you spray, do you need basically a waiver for every time that you're spraying? And the answer is no. Once you get that initial exemption under 107.36 to fly and be able to spray hazardous chemicals, that's good, like Joy said, for the 2 years. It's not each individual operation that you're doing, and each time you do an operation, you need a waiver.
Cool, yeah, thank you. Sorry, I didn't clarify that part. Yes, you don't need an exemption every time.
Yeah, good. Joy, I also want to add, because, you know, this is our world. So to us, I mean, you know, this is kind of just stuff we could sit around and talk about over coffee, right? But I also know to a lot of our customers that this could be really overwhelming and really daunting. So, you know, yeah, there's all these rules and CFRs and, you know, aspects of each of those, of course. And I just want to remind customers that it's not required that you be the expert in all of this stuff, right? I mean, that's why we put this package and this service together for you, is so that you can just come to us and say, look, here's where I live, here's where I want to spray, here's what I want to spray. HSE figure it out for me. So our consulting package takes all of this like brain swirl out of the equation for you, and that's our goal. So you know, we do want to get as into the weeds as well. Forgive the pun, but we want to get into the weeds as much as you want to as our customers. But we don't want to overwhelm you with it, like thinking that it's just a mountain to climb, because it's not really as complex as we know it is. You know, when you take advantage of the service, it's, you know, it's way more straightforward. And everything with the government, you might say, is a bit complex when it comes to regulations and rules. So I just wanted to put that part back in too. Joy, I'm ready to share that second slide whenever you are, okay?
Oh yeah, sure, thank you. And then we did have a quick kind of a more on the swarm, again, on that 20-liter model, if it has the swarm capacity. Simon or Brian, do you guys want to take that one?
Go ahead and take that. So currently the 20-liter models do not have what you would consider a swarming ability, but that doesn't mean that you can't fly multiple aircraft at the same time. The word swarm is, I don't know, a little controversial as to what it actually means. All of our drones currently, you can fly more than one drone at a time. What you can't do currently is operate more than one drone from a single controller or a single device at a time.
That's not
it is possible to operate the aircraft or more than one aircraft with multiple controllers at a time.
Thanks, Simon.
Okay, so I need to kind of jump in on that one.
Kelly's trying to talk here, but we can't hear her.
Not from a technical standpoint from the controller, but you are able to operate with multiple drones with one pilot. But there are mitigations that come into that. I'm not talking about the actual controller. I'm talking about pilot. Like if you're a single pilot and you're operating multiple drones at one time, you can do that if there are mitigations in place. And we do have an exemption for multiple drone operations for the M8 Pro, I believe.
Awesome. So I think it's the difference, Kelly and Simon. Are we talking about the technological abilities versus the regulatory abilities? And they're two different components, right?
Yes.
Cool. Okay, great. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you, Kelly, for clarifying that.
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in there. I just didn't. It is possible, though, from a regulatory standpoint to do that.
Well, it's really perfect too if you think about Simon's here on the technical side, so that's where his whole world is, right? And Kelly's here on the other side, the regulatory side. So it's just perfect. I'm glad we have both of you on to be able to speak to both aspects of it, because that's important to customers. So great, thank you, Joy. We've got just a couple minutes left, so I want to have any of our attendees that have last-minute questions, make sure that you go to the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen and submit those. If we don't get a chance to answer them here in the next 90 seconds or whatever, we'll follow up with you when we post this recording on YouTube. We'll have in the description all the questions and answers that we didn't get to. So just make sure that you type those right away so that we can get those before the webinar ends. Joy, do you want me to go through the last slide there?
Please, thank you.
All right, great. So give me a second here.
And then while you're doing that, we've got another question from Chuck here. If I need help with the regulations in Canada for applying cover crops, can you assist and point me in the right direction? So cover crops would be the seeds and depending on the economic poison list in Canada that they could dispense without any kind of regulatory requirements on that. But we also have our partners and dealer in Canada that has formed together, and Brian, you might want to correct me if I'm wrong here, with Dan at the USDA that's also looking at regulatory framework for Canada, and they've kind of put a group together
Yeah, our
to
company's
look at
part
that.
of a working group, and we're interacting and working directly with the regulators, including the PMRA. So we can get in touch offline about that. And Joy, you can send them a link for our agents up in Canada so that they can connect and learn from each other. So cool. All right, let's cover this last slide here. We're gonna run over a couple minutes in time. Hopefully that's okay with all of our participants. But Joy, you can take it away on that last slide.
All right, thanks you guys. So we wanted to kind of give this to you really quick just to get an idea. So these are the sprayer packages that we offer with our aircraft for FAA processing and consulting, where Kelly and I will help you do the entire part. So our spray packages are determined on whether it's operations under 55 or over 55, and you can see the pricing right there. Our consulting services include the exemptions you'll need and the approvals you'll need to spray. So we'll take care of which ones and what parts and what relief you need and all that. Kelly gets to do all that work. We will also provide your FOPM is your flight operations and procedures manual. Your SMS is your safety manual. You also have your pilot and air crew training manuals, which is what I was referring to earlier. So if you get our spray package, we help you create those. And then of course support throughout the Part 137 certificate process with your local FSDO, which is your FAA Flight Services District Office. Other add-ons that a lot of our clients have gotten with these packages that would be above that pricing, and we can work with you on that dependent on your operations. That would be operating more than one UAS, like we have customers that are flying multiple aircraft. Or if you need to be able to spray at night for night operations waiver. If you need airspace authorization, flying closer to an airport, any other airspace restriction that you might have. And then there's something that comes along only on operations over 55 pounds, where there is a bubble if you cannot get permissions from the person or people or agency who own a vehicle, a structure, a vessel, or anything that's within 500 foot of where you're operating, then there is an additional exemption, additional request that we put in so that you can operate within 500 foot of those vessels when you can't get permission. But again, that all only applies to the over 55, and we've got Kelly working the safety cases for those. So anything else that you might see as an add-on that we haven't touched on here, ask us. I have confidence that Kelly can get you whatever approvals you need. How about that? She's like, uh-oh.
Perfect. All right, great. So in just a couple moments, to all of our attendees, we're going to wrap this webinar up. So again, kind of last chance here to submit your questions on that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you'd like us to address them after the webinar. And Kelly, Joy, final kind of departing words. What do you want customers to know, or anything else you want to put in before we wrap up?
Yeah, I'll add in, because I know, again, like you said earlier, Brian, Kelly and I are really familiar with all the FAA stuff. And it's not something you have to necessarily know and learn just to get help and support on. So we know it can seem a little overwhelming, and it's all possible. So anything you guys need to be able to get out there, we've got customers that are doing it, and we can help you, kind of navigate that process so you're not doing it on your own. But it's not a barrier. It's not a barrier to being able to get out there and spray from drones.
Awesome, cool.
Yeah.
Kelly, anything for you?
The only thing I'd like to add to that is I second what Joy said about it's not a barrier. It's a little convoluted at times, and it's hard for the average person to understand on how to navigate it sometimes, and that's what we're here for, because we do live this stuff. And there are many times that I'm in communications with the FAA to get clarification on things myself, and I used to work there. So it's ever changing. There's different interpretations of the regulations and what can and can't apply to certain areas. So it's not, but you put it in our hands and we take kind of the worry out of that. I've gotten lots of these approvals, especially for over 55 pounds. Safety management can be very daunting. And for the normal person to try to do this, it's unless you have specific training in it, it's very difficult. And even with the waivers these days of, flying more than one aircraft, even if you're not doing agricultural spraying and you're just operating under 107, or you're flying multiple aircraft, or you want an exemption to BB loss specifically. There's been about 1,200 waivers filed with the FAA by clients. 99% of them never receive a waiver because it's very, very complicated. Night waivers, things like that, there's specific requirements that need to be done. So
Yeah,
that's we're here to help you to fly safe.
Yeah, that's just a great, aspect for customers to be able to know there is the complexity, right? And customers that have the time and the resources and the desire, I think, frankly, to sit down and figure this out can totally do it. And if that's not something that a customer wants to do, they can hire it out by an expert, I think that just the last thing I'd like to add is, on behalf of the whole industry, we just thank you, everyone that's on this webinar with us for being some of the pioneers, right? And the people that are out there, really leading the way with this kind of technology. And I know it's kind of a chunky process right now, but, at the same time, we're figuring out the regulations with our regulators, right? We're paving the path forward. So in the future, it's very, very likely, and everything that we see from our perspective says that this is going to get easier and easier and easier. But, frankly, the FAA is trying their best to fit this all into rules and regs that were created 50, 60 years ago. So there's just a big learning process, and the FAA is a big machine to move. So, just hang in there. And, again, our goal is to take all of the headache out for you, so that we can kind of shield you from all of that paperwork and the process of it. So just thanks again for joining us today. Joy, when is our next webinar that we have?
It's actually next Thursday, and the invitation will go out today.
Awesome.
Same time.
Great. And what's the content of that one next week? Oh, Joy might be frozen. I'll tell you, because I know the content of next week's webinar is that it's all things drones. So it's literally anything and everything that has to do with drones. It's just a kind of a free-for-all chat. We're calling it like a coffee chat. So bring your coffee, unless it's really late where you are, then bring your tea or something, I guess. But anyway, looking really forward to having all of you there. And anyone else that didn't get to join us live, you can click on a link on the YouTube page that'll give you a chance to RSVP and attend the future webinars too. So from all of us, HSE, UAV, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And we'll see you again soon. Take care.
Thanks, you guys. Stay safe.
Bye.
Bye.
Back. Perfect.